Good morning. Today I'm going to inform you about the civil rights movement of the 1950s led by Dr. Martin Luther King. This was one of the most historical moments for African Americans. One important thing that I found interesting was in 1954 the Supreme Court had decided for a case of Brown versus Board of Ed that segregating public schools was unconstitutional, meaning that you couldn't separate black from white. And that ruling overturned a earlier case which was known as Plessy versus Ferguson. And the ruling for that was schools were separate and they were constitutional as long as they were equal. But that ruling was overturned because Brown versus Board of Ed. So now schools had to be integrated and equal. And with February being Black History Month, I felt compelled to share my fascination for this historical time. Many young people today don't know much about the civil rights movement, and that's very sad because it was a very historical event that took place in history. So it's really good to educate yourself on your history as well as being African American. But today I'm going to inform you about what happened during the civil rights movement of the 1950s as well as its effect on the present day. On August the 28th, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. led the March on Washington, as well as he was going to give his I Have a Dream speech, which is a very renowned speech. Martin Luther King was a social activist as well as a Baptist minister who have led the civil rights movement. One event that created a lot of more events to take place was when a woman named Rosa Parks was sitting on the bus and she didn't give up her seat, so she was jailed. And Martin Luther King and the NAACP had come together and they devised a plan to start a citywide bus boycott. This boycott had lasted for 382 days. More efforts such as this wanted to make racial injustice known worldwide. So more things took place, like sit-ins that combated the end of segregation at lunch counters in the southern region. And Dr. King's efforts were starting to make national notoriety. In 1963, he had organized a demonstration in Birmingham, Alabama, where, like I said, he had his I Have a Dream speech, where he talked about racial injustice and oppression. Now that I have discussed who Martin Luther King Jr. is and his significance to the March on Washington as well as other efforts, I will discuss the change that his efforts contributed to produce. In July of 1964, Congress had passed a law forbidding discrimination on the basis of sex and race. This act paved the way for future law that would be passed by 1990 President Bush. This act was the American with Disabilities Act, also called ADA. This was one of many laws that followed the Civil Rights Act. In the year of 1963, it was a lot of racial discrimination, segregation, and inequality, and killing of African Americans. Even people with disabilities were treated differently. It didn't matter if it was your skin color, if you had a disability, or what. There was a lot of inequality going on. But after Martin Luther King's efforts, more efforts started to take place, such as the ADA Act, the American with Disabilities Act, and it prohibited the use of discrimination in areas of employment, transportation, and public places. It also gave people of physical and mental disabilities the same rights as everyone else. It's been about 26 years since the act passed, and children with disabilities can have accommodations set to them. There are also special ed classes that can better assist them. And throughout the years, the quality of education treatment of any race or disability has increased. Because of Dr. King's efforts, opportunities for many types of people of any age, race, disability, or anything have increased The ADA Act and many other acts preceding Dr. Martin Luther King's efforts have allowed the American people to live a better life with more equality. Lastly, I will now explain the precedent the Civil Rights Act has set, and I will discuss the impact that it has on this present day. Like I said, the Civil Rights Act has opened up millions of opportunities for Americans. Privileges once entitled to certain people are now entitled to everyone. Barriers such as race, age, gender, disability are not barriers anymore. Everyone is allowed equal access and privilege in the world. Dr. King's leadership gave other people the courage to take a stand and fight for what they desire. He paved a way for voices to be heard as well as actions. His nonviolent approach to fight the injustice was very powerful. The nation believed in him and looked up to him as a strong leader willing to fight for what was right. His nonviolence efforts were different than what people were seeing because there was beatings and a lot of violence going on. His nonviolent efforts made a bigger impact than what it would if they were violent. He showed people how things should be done, and he wanted to put out there that violence has its repercussions, but silence also is a very powerful thing, and actions speak louder than words. He was a prominent leader in the civil rights efforts and even won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was widely known for his disobedience and civility. In conclusion, Dr. Martin Luther King was an important man in the civil rights movement. He has paved the way for other activists to speak out for what they believe in. If it wasn't for his efforts, America would not be where it is today. The civil rights movement was the biggest movement and part of America's racial injustice history. Even though racial prejudice is still present today, this landmark, but the world would not be where it is today if Dr. Martin Luther King didn't do what he did for African Americans as well as other people who wanted to make a change. Well, I hope you learned something new about Dr. Martin Luther King and the March on Washington and what he has done for Americans as well as people of minority and the United States. I have left you with important knowledge in our American history. No matter what, race, age, job, etc. The civil rights has changed everyone's life no matter the discrepancy. Everyone's life was impacted by this, whether you're white, you're black, you're disabled, you're 60, you're 4. Everyone's life has been impacted. The civil rights movement has impacted everyone, and it should be for good. Thank you.